Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazicich, and today we'll be continuing on in our series in the book of Hebrews. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them up, and we will be looking at Hebrews chapter 10, verses 32 to 39. Okay, and in this particular slide, we'll look at a few statements here made by James Thompson to set the table for our discussion today in Hebrews 10:32 to 39. The exhortation in 10:32 to 39 provides the most specific indication of the history of the community in the entire homily. Soon after their conversion, photisthantes, enlightened, they endured a hard struggle with sufferings. Undoubtedly, they suffered the fate that Christians experience everywhere. Paul warns new converts in Thessalonica that they are destined for afflictions in 1 Thessalonians 3:3. And he encourages the Philippians not to be intimidated by their adversaries in 1:28. Long before the emergence of persecution sponsored by governmental authorities, Christian communities met local opposition everywhere because of their absolute loyalty to Christ and withdrawal from civic life. Greco-Roman society, because of its polytheistic nature, was tolerant of various deities and religious practices. Christians, however, denied the gods and claimed that the God of Israel alone was worthy of worship. Thus, they disturbed the peace of ancient communities, often undermining family cohesion by converting members of the household. In their eagerness to save the world, Christians did not shy away from shattering the unity and sanctity of the family, the basic unit of society and thus of the state, so says Fitzgerald. Consequently, Tacitus, of the early 2nd century, called the Christian movement a deadly disease and accused the Christians of hatred of the human race. Pliny described it as a wretched infection. Minucius Felix, a 3rd century Christian apologist, records the complaint or their complaint. You do not go to our shows. You take no part in our processions. You are not present at our public banquets. You shrink in horror from our sacred games. So that was the accusation lodged against the Christians, and that's true because the same exists today for us, that we don't go to their shows and we don't go to their gay festivals coming out, and we don't partake of their necessarily their public banquets and to the same degree of lawlessness as they would, and as far as the Olympic Games in those days, they were all conducted in the nude, so of course Christians did not patronize such things. So yes, Christianity did upset the status quo, and for very good reasons, because it needed to be upset, because we cannot tolerate sin, and we have to abide by the laws of the community that's set forth within the biblical text about how we conduct our lives and how we think about things, and so if you haven't found out already, Christianity is not the most inviting of worldviews, and so today we hear a lot about don't cram your stuff down my throat or whatever. So anyhow, such has been the same throughout the world in all ages to different and varying degrees. But this will quickly come upon us as we go forward in time here. So don't think it's it's odd if you begin to suffer persecution for the way you live. That's a part of what it means to be a Christian. You're going to in some sense, cause divisions And we'll see, we'll see in the text how this affected the community. Okay, and coming to this particular slide, as we always do, we're going to then offer a translation and present some type of structural analysis by which to understand and digest the text. Okay, so beginning here in Hebrews 10:32, now be mindful of the former days in which, after having been enlightened, you endured a great contest of sufferings, partly by being made a spectacle with both reproaches and afflictions, and in part by becoming companions with those whose lives were turned upside down in this manner. 4. You showed sympathy unto prisoners, and you accepted the extortion of your substances with joy, since knowing yourselves to have a greater and abiding possession, and we'll just say in heaven, okay? Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of patience, in order that after having done the will of God, you might receive the promise. 4. Yet a little time, the one who is coming shall come and not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink away to destruction, but we are those of faith to the possession of the soul. Okay, so that is our unit here, and if I direct your attention here up here to the structure, then what you can see here that I've divided the text into 3 component parts. Now, it could basically just be left in 2, but I've just left the author's final summary statement as a separate unit, and there's reasons for that. But when we come here to this particular unit, 32 to 39, it's an exhortation to remember the past, preserve in the present, and have faith for the future promises. Okay, so the first part here is remembering the past. Okay. And so this is in verses 32 to 34 here, it's a call to remember the former days of persecution and to persist in patience. And when we come here to verse 35, if we come down here, we can see me apa baleta un. So this is going to be an inferential, therefore. So then he's going to then take up the points that he just scored here in verses 32 to 34, and then he's going to offer some type of advice going forward. So that's why I wanted to divide the text here at verse 35. And that's the reasoning behind it. But looking back here to 32 to 34, we can see that this text is further divided here. So when you come to verse 34, we can see a clear division. So we have the word gar here, is 4. So it's going to offer a basis statement. So then that's going to then provide for us to have point, double alpha and double beta here, okay, underneath verses 32 to 34. And then, so just looking at the structuring devices within the text, we can see here that we have this paraenetic exhortation beginning here in verses 35 to 36, okay, because as soon as you come here, we have a scriptural basis statement for the exhortation. So we have this exhortation here, therefore do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. And then why? For you have need of patience, that after having done the will of God, you might receive the promise. So so that's even a subdivision here. There's the basis clause here for this admonition here within this paraenesis here. But then the larger structural device here in 37 is the scriptural basis statement that is given for the exhortation. And the exhortation was everything here in 30, within 35 to 36. Okay, because once you come to 37 to 38, then he's quoting this composite Midrashic complex scriptural basis statement for the exhortation that he just gave. Okay, and then the unit ends off here in verse 39 with the author's final summary statement concerning faith. Okay, and we could say, we see here it starts off, but we are not of those who shrink away to destruction. Okay, but of those who are of faith to the possession of the soul. So I left that there as a separate point. Now I'm sure that another way to structure this is just to put this as a double gamma here underneath 35 to 39 if you were to structure it that way. That would be fine. I just left it here as a final summary statement, the author's final summary statement, okay, but we can see here, so then the text has these divisions within them, and so what it is just working through the text and conceptually and looking at the conceptual units of thought and then itemizing them and dividing them and trying to make some sense and flow of the text. So this is important so that you can, as you read the text, then to be able to put it underneath some type of heading so you can gather your thoughts and then really be able to with a lot of thought, this does, remember, to be able to create a structural analysis, it's meditation upon the text, and you can only do that through meditation. So you have to basically memorize the text, and then try to think, okay, what are the thoughts that emerge, and then you itemize them. And so I do believe that this here offers a sound way of moving forward, and of taking into account the various strata within this particular unit. Okay, and coming to this particular slide, we'll look here rather shortly at the diagrammatical relationship of these two sentences. So this is verses 32 to 33. And de here basically is functioning as a marker linking narrative units. So it's just linking the previous unit of apostasy with our present unit here, concerning the exhortation here to encouragement. And so we began here, the author begins here with this present passive imperative, anamenes kestha, be mindful of the former days. And then it goes into this relative clause, prepositional relative clause, in which, after having been enlightened, you endured a great contest of sufferings, partly by being made a spectacle by both reproaches and afflictions, and partly by becoming companions with those whose lives were turned upside down in such manner. And so basically here, what we have here, as I had analyzed in the structural analysis, we had this part, verse 32, as the general reference to, be mine. It's a call. This is a call for them to recall their past experiences of persecution in general. And then when you get here to verse 33, okay, in this correlation of correspondences, it itemizes and specifies the type of persecutions. One here, partly by being made a spectacle by both reproaches and afflictions. So we'll take this as, psychological, and afflictions as possibly physical, light physical, harassment. And then in the second correlative member, and partly by becoming, and we'll say, companions with those whose lives were turned upside down. So this anastrepho here, the participle here, the substantive that we are going to then look at this. It's a present participle, passive. And anastrepho means to turn upside down. So I just kept that understanding by whose lives who were turned upside down. So I think that's a good translation. Brings out the meaning of really what's going on here by these people who were persecuted. So they in this correspondence here, it shows that they themselves were made a spectacle here, by this particular. This is another adverbial participle of means here, and we'll take it as a present passive adverbial participle of means, by being made a spectacle. And then we have reproaches and afflictions. Okay. And then, as we said down here, that the next correlated phrase here, and partly by becoming companions with those whose lives were turned upside down. So I think he really he shows them that he wanted them to be mindful of all that they have, all the persecution that they went through, and then when we come here to verse 34, it's going to be a basis clause, and it's going to be the basis clause for this, for them to be being mindful of these former days of persecution. And so we'll look here at the thoughts here of William Lane. If evidence is deemed strong enough to support a Roman destination for Hebrews, which I subscribe to, verses 32 to 34 shed light on the earlier history of the congregation addressed. These men and women constituted an old guard. They had been Christians since the Claudian period, when disturbances in the Jewish quarter in the year AD 49 attracted unfavorable attention from the imperial authorities. The emperor, Claudius, issued a decree expelling the Jews from Rome. The size of the Jewish community in Rome made it impossible to enforce the decree completely, but certainly both Jewish and Christian leadership had been affected. Sporadic persecution of those who remain undoubtedly followed. In the case of the Jewish Christian leaders, Aquila and Priscilla, Acts 18, 1-2, you recall, the Claudian decree meant banishment from Rome and almost certainly the loss of property for Aquila and Priscilla. Others in the same house church experienced various indignities, including imprisonment, injury, deprivation, for the sake of their commitment to Christ. Throughout these experiences, they had steadfastly maintained a courageous stance as Christians. So this is partly the historical record here during the Claudian era, AD 49, and you'll recall, in the book of Acts, when Aquila and Priscilla, when Paul met up with them in Corinth and in Cenchrea there on the peninsula, that they had told Paul that they had, our Luke tells us that they had just come from Rome recently, having been banished, and that was the year AD 49, and that could be all of the instances that this particular congregation went through, that William Lane here is making mention of, and I would subscribe to such an understanding. Okay, and coming here, then we saw here when in verse 30, in verse 32, when they became a spectacle, right? They were made a spectacle, and in their great contest. So this is where. This is the Roman Colosseum here, and then the next slide here is the amphitheater in Ephesus, and so both of these served as places where the theater, the dramas, the plays were all made. It's also the place where they were gathered. When people were being punished and ridiculed, the Christians this is the place where they would have been on the stage here, so to speak, of being made a spectacle to the Greco-Roman audience here of their particular designation, wherever this occurred, whether it was Rome or elsewhere. But this is a slide showing Ephesus, but it would show you that they would be made a spectacle. So this language here that our author uses in the text would bring this type of imagery to mind, whether or not it actually occurred in an amphitheater or something like the Colosseum in Rome, whether or not it occurred in those areas. But this was the metaphor that the author used, and it may have served in some basis in reality. And we'll see here in some comments following here by Dr. Thompson. Theatridzane, literally to act in the theater, takes on the metaphorical meaning of expose publicly and focuses on public disgrace. It suggests the image of the theater, the site not only of performances and games, but also for public punishments. Philo describes an occasion when the Jews were put on public display in the theater and subjected to abuse. Paul uses a related word and declares, "We have become a spectacle," a theatron, to the world, to angels, and to humankind. The insults here, anaidesmoi, anaidismoi, also indicate the public humiliation and shame associated with punishment. The word has connotations of mockery and scorn for the insults encountered for the Lord's sake. Persecutions, thlipsis here, including both physical and mental abuse that the community suffers for the sake of Christ. These images focus not only on the persecutions faced by the community, but also on the community's loss of honor and experience of shame. And so here Thompson is just explaining for us the meaning of these words within Greco-Roman society, and how specifically how they experienced shame here. This was definitely shame, but it was a mark of honor in God's kingdom because they suffered shame for the kingdom of God. So that's a mark of honor. So we live in an upside down world with and the principles. We may be despised by the world, but we are we are honored and by God, and will be in the next life. Okay, and then coming here, this is verse 34, and this becomes the basis clause for the exhortation to remember, past persecutions. So this is the basis clause. For, and so what is it? For you did what? You sympathized, right? Or you showed sympathy for prisoners. Okay, and I guess here this chi here, it's going to function, I believe here as adjunctive. Likewise, for you likewise showed sympathy. So you likewise showed sympathy for prisoners, and right here, prosedex astha, and this would be accept here, and you accepted the extortion of your substances with joy, and then dropping down here, since knowing, so this is an adverbial participle that we're going to take here as causal, as its function. Since knowing that you yourselves have a greater and abiding substance, and then I just think it's best to understand your mind in heaven. Okay, and you could even look at the old King James. There is some textual evidence here for putting in uranio and uraniois here in the heavens. Okay, so and it just makes sense to me that that this is what it's referring to, since we know ourselves to have a greater and abiding possession. All right, so that's what we have, and it's both now and for the future, but it will be fully understood and known as we inherit eternal life. But anyhow, so this here, we can see that this verse 34 is a bifurcated unit here, that they showed sympathy for prisoners, and they accepted the extortion of their substances with joy. Okay, knowing. So here's the because they knew they could accept the extortion of their goods. Why? Because they knew that they had a greater and enduring or abiding possession. Okay, that they themselves had. Okay, so that pretty much that looks here at this unit here, diagrammatically. I know this is a prepositional clause here, but anyhow, infinitive clause. Excuse me, arcane here. But I think that's all I wanted to spend the time on this particular slide. We'll move on. And I wanted to come here to Lane because most commentators are trying to pick up on this. But I do want us to understand this vis-a-vis structural analysis. But let's just look at what he has to say. The details provided in verses 33 to 34 clarify the character of sufferings endured. The contrasting tuta men, tuta de statements, sometimes ... and other occasions, or in part, introduce a chiasm having significant implications for the interpretation of the details. So sometimes you were publicly exposed. This goes back here to verse 33, or previous verse. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to ridicule by both insults and persecutions, and on other occasions you showed solidarity with those who were treated in this way. 4. In fact, you shared in the sufferings of those in prison and cheerfully accepted the seizure of your property. Now, this is really ingenious, and it goes not. Lane is picking up on here on what the French interpreter had to say earlier. The careful, structured recital of past indignities suggests that a part of the congregation had been exposed to ridicule because they had been defenseless against the seizure of their property. Okay. Others within the congregation had identified themselves with the hardships of those who had been imprisoned and that had endured from the authorities. If this is a correct interpretation on the structure, the first group had experienced not only verbal and physical abuse, but imprisonment as well. The other members of the house church had shown solidarity with those who had borne the brunt of these sufferings. Now, you don't have to divide it off this way. These things could have happened to just to some of them it could have been this way, others it could have been this way, but some of them could have shared in both of these. So I just want you to understand that some did this, some did that, but some could have shared in both of these. But remember, the basis clause here, then what he's showing here is that this basis clause shows, it reflects back here, okay, that you shared in the sufferings of those in prison, okay, and that this is showing the correlation of here. Other occasions you had solidarity with them that were mistreated in this way. So it could have been talking about prisoners here, and then it states it very obvious here. And then it talked about here, you cheerfully accepted the seizure of your property, which would correlate with AA here. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to ridicule by both insults and persecutions. So he's just trying to show that there is some type of relationship here, chiastically here, okay, and that works. But you don't want to remember that right here, at this particular point here, that this is for here. Gar is functioning as the basis clause for the command to remember the persecution of former days. And yes, it still could be correlatively related here, as he suggests, and others. Van Hoy here, Albert Van Hoy is a French scholar who suggested this in earlier time, and I believe Lane's picking up on that, and most people do. It works good here, but don't let it destroy the structure, because this is functioning as a basis clause here in verse 34. Okay, It's a basis clause for 32 to 33. That's its function, as well as being correlative here, as he suggests chiastically. So you don't want to lose sight of that, and we'll see this here in our slide here, that you can see I have this as the basis statement for the call to remember, verse 34, because when you come down here to verse 34, we have the gar. So it serves our basis statement, that serves as the basis statement here for the call to remember the former days of enduring persecution. Okay, and that's really, really important for us to see. Okay, and coming to this particular slide, coming here to verse 35, we're going to have a transition in the structural analysis. Therefore, it draws an inference. It draws an inference from what was said, specifically from verses 32 to 34 about remembering the former days. So he's taking all of that that intellectual knowledge of their remembrance of all the past persecutions that they went through, and then so he's using that. Then he comes to a conclusion here. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you have need of patience, in order that you might receive the promised after having done the will of God. Boom. So here, verse 35 here is quite involved. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence. Okay. So here, so this is like an air subjunctive, second person, and so this basically here, what he's telling them here by this prohibition is not to throw away their confidence, which basically telling them, do not throw away, basically the way this functions in the context, do not throw away your salvation, okay, which has a great reward. So this is talking about the eternal life to come, the life that is promised throughout this book that we saw back there in 9:25, which will come about on the day of the Lord when he returns. And we saw that back in verse, I believe, of 10:25, even more as you see the day approaching, right? The day of the Lord. So here he's summing up what he's trying to do here. Remember, he's verses 32 to 39 here function as the word of encouragement, okay? And he doesn't want them, okay, to throw away their confidence and this is going to go directly back here. By the time you get to verse 39, you'll understand that what he's talking about here is he's recalling verses 26 to 31 here about apostasy, and that becomes very clear in verse 39. And so don't throw away. So remember, you can't lose your salvation. You have to throw it away. Here in the book of Hebrews, or in any, you just can't. It's not like losing your keys or your wallet or something like that. You can't. Your salvation is a lot more secure than that. This is just talking about you don't want to just walk away from your confession of Christ here, and talking to these as Jewish Christians here. Don't leave your faith in as Christ as the Messiah, nor lose your confidence in the power of his sacrifice, the blood that would give atonement for us. So this is what he's talking about. Don't throw away your boldness, okay? And and then he says, which has a great reward, right? And then he has another basis clause here. 4, you have need of endurance in order that you might receive the promise after having done the will of God. So, basically, the basis part of the clause, this is all basically talking about end of life here. You have to endure to the end, okay? So you have need of patience. And just like all of us, this goes for all of us. This is a lifelong covenant that we have become a part of, and it's not something we can take vacations from or whatever. This is a lifetime lifestyle and commitment to Christ, and that we all have need of patience, okay? And then there's a purpose to this. Why? Why do we still have need of patience? In order that we might receive the promise. Okay, so the promise, remember, we inherit the promises, and this is going to be the kingdom to come. After having done the will of God, we might receive the promise. Oh, this is a temporal adverbial participle here, from poieo, aorist here. Okay, active. So this is basically how this is functioning. So verse 35 begins the new unit all the way to verse 39. Or we should say to verse 38. We're cutting off verse 39 just for the author's summary statement. So verses 35 to 38 are going to then form this new unit here, and it's basically comprised of this exhortation here that includes an exhortation. Remember, paraenetic material is both an admonition and exhortation. So we have the admonition here: do not throw away your confidence. And then it tells us through this relative clause, which has a great reward, and then 4 gives us the basis for this prohibition here. And for you have need of patience, and then the purpose of this is that you might receive the promise after having done the will of God. Boom. So that's very important here for this exhortation here that he's going into, and we'll see what happens next is that he goes into the scriptural basis for this exhortation here offered here in this present slide here. So coming here, this is what we just got done reading. 4 in verse 35. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence as a great reward, for you have need of patience, in order that after having done the will of God, you might receive the promise. Then you come here to verse 37. So that comprised verses, let's look here, the inferential exhortation concerning endurance and faith. 35 and 36 here is the paraenesis, the exhortation concerning boldness and endurance. So we had the admonition and reward, the basis clause, and the purpose clause. That's what we just saw in verses 35 to 36. Okay. Once we come here to verse 37 and 38, we're coming into what I'm going to call a Midrashic scriptural basis for the exhortation. So this is really kind of it's basically Midrash use of scripture serving as the basis of the exhortation. And we'll see that it's used eschatologically, okay? That the scriptures here are used eschatologically, and we'll see that here in the use of in this Midrashic complex. Here we'll see Isaiah 26:20 being used in a little while, okay, and then we'll see it being used christologically here, as far as the one who comes shall come and not delay. This is being used christologically, and then he's going to use the scriptural quotation as a Midrashic pastoral paraenesis, the exhortation to live by faith and conditional warning. And so this is all here. What we are going to be looking at here is all the way from 37 to 38. We're going to preserve 39 itself as the author's summary statement, okay? But it's very closely connected here to the scriptural quotation. But it moves beyond the quotation to an actual author's final summary statement, okay? So looking at verse 37 and 38, for yet a little while the one who is coming shall come, and he shall not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he turns back, or that's fine. If he draws back, turns back, okay. My soul has no pleasure in him, but we are not of those who shrink away to destruction, but we are those of faith to the preservation of the soul. Okay, and then coming here to this particular slide, and this fine gentleman, what I just wanted to do was, for your benefit, I'm not going to go through all of this, but Dr. Marvin Sweeney, he took the chair of my old professor, Rolf Knierim, and Marvin replaced him at Claremont School of Theology. And Marvin is a fine man. He invited me to lunch one day. He was very, very cordial, and he just basically wanted to know what I was doing, in terms of my my work in eschatology and intertextuality from the book of Joel. Anyhow, so we just talked about that, but he's a very, very astute scholar. Now we wouldn't consider him, a conservative, but I think within the Jewish community, his assessments are somewhat on the conservative side, I would say, and but his work is very valuable, and I have learned a lot from his work. I've benefited quite a bit. But anyhow, I just wanted to say that. But he authored this particular book from Knierim's series here that he created, Forms of the Old Testament Literature, this photal here, and then he wrote the structural analyses for the whole book for Isaiah 1 to 39 and 40 to 66. Excuse me, those are already done. But I put here the whole context from which we get this little phrase here in Hebrew, Kim'at Regah, here in a short moment, in a little moment, okay? And we'll see how the Septuagint translates this. But I wanted you to have the context from which how all of this came. And since I already told you this is proto-apocalyptic literature, we should just go ahead and I'll read from verse 19. Your dead shall live, and together with my corpse they shall rise. Awaken and shout, O those who dwell in the dust, for the dew of lights is your dew, and the earth shall cause the departed spirits to fall out of it. Come, my people, go into your chambers, shut the door behind you, hide yourselves for a little moment until the indignation shall pass. For behold, Yahweh goes forth from his place to punish the iniquity of the inhabitants of the earth upon them. The earth shall reveal her blood, and she shall no longer cover over her slain. Okay, so this is the, I wanted to show you, especially with 19, talking about the resurrection of the dead, and how the prophet includes himself here, along with those who shall rise, and they are called forth to awaken and shout, and those who dwell in the dust. Okay, so this eschatologizes everything about this little quote here in a little while. Okay, because it's talking about, right before, the resurrection of the dead, that right before that happens, that Yahweh will come forth and judge the inhabitants of the earth, and then the righteous are summoned to go and hide themselves for a little while until the indignation pass. And so I just, I had this here for your benefit. And one other thing that we should note, because back in verse 27, our author in the in those texts there talking about vengeance and retribution theology, he took our author took that verse 27 of this chapter, and it actually comes from this particular verse. He somewhat just shortened it up, tightened it up, but the wording came from here, and it says, "O Lord, your arm is exalted, and they did not know, and after knowing they shall become ashamed. Jealousy shall take the undisciplined people, and now fire shall devour the adversaries." So we can see here that fire, and we can see here that jealousy, and we can see here that the adversaries that the fire devours. So all this terminology was taken and used by our author in verse 27. So this chapter is still on the mind of our author, and he comes down here to quote this verse here in a little while, because remember, this is all taken eschatologically, and this is all referring to Christ's second coming. So when our author is reading chapter 26 here in Isaiah, he's reading this christologically. Okay, and so I'm just wanting, I just wanting you to understand this, that where all of this material here is coming from, and that he is going to then eschatologize his quotation from Habakkuk, and he's going to eschatologize it from taking from this verse here out of this chapter, which is all composed in this apocalyptic eschatology that our author has been fishing in for writing things in this particular chapter. So coming here to now this is verse 38, and the quotation continues from I just have this gar here, knowing that this is still part of the basis clause, but the righteous, my righteous one here, shall live from faith, and my soul here shall not take pleasure in him if he shrinks away. So this is just reading it, according to the diagrammatical analysis that I have here. But one thing that we'll note here is that the clauses are reversed here in the book of Hebrews, and we'll see that here in a moment. Let's just move on to this next slide here. And I just want to get a grasp about where we're at here. So we're on this Midrashic scriptural basis for the exhortation, okay? And so we looked at verse 37. The time is close at hand. And so that's taking up here Etigar, Mikron, Hasan, okay? So for in a very short while, okay, so then that is this eschatologizes this particular it sets up the quotation from Habakkuk, eschatologizes it vis-a-vis Isaiah 26, as we saw, okay, so that that's its function. And then he has the one who is coming shall come and not delay here. And so this here is the eschatological promise of Christ's second coming. Okay, that's how, when we read this here, that's how we're understanding it, as if it was written this way when we read, our Old Testament from the Hebrew Bible. Okay, but that's not the case. It's really, our author uses the Septuagint as his base, and so the Septuagint has already somewhat interpreted the text messianically. Okay, and we'll see that. So for the one who is coming shall come and not delay, and if he shrinks back, my soul shall not take pleasure in him. So then we're just looking here at this double beta here. This is the, this is verse 38 here. Here about the exhortation, but my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrink back, my soul take no pleasure in him. And then this is a conditional warning for the Christians here to then live by faith and not shrink back and turn into the apostates that he just got done speaking about and warning about in verses 26 to 31. That's exactly how verse 38 is functioning here. It's functioning as a pastoral paraenesis. It's passed basically from a scriptural quotation, because the scriptural quotation has undergone a transformation by our author and made it an application. So this is basically he's telling us what the text means for his readers in the present time of writing this letter to them. So 38 is accommodated, and then it's basically now becoming an exhortation in and of itself, instead of a quotation, because he transforms the meaning of the passage here. We'll see what he does in the next slide. Okay, so coming here, I want to draw your attention here. This particular structural analysis here was created by Michael Floyd. Okay, we'll see that. And this is basically his structural analysis for Habakkuk 2:1-5. And you can see that my structural analyses has followed his, because we all learn this from Rolf Knierim in his for doing structural analysis, and it's come to be known as conceptual analysis, structural and conceptual analysis, because you're dealing with concepts and conceptualities of presuppositions that lie in and behind the text, and so we have to then recreate these when we come to create a structural analysis, and this is what they end up looking like. So it's very detailed, and I think that the New Testament scholars should definitely take their cues here from the Old Testament scholar here, Rolf Knierim. He was one of my teachers at Claremont that I had, and I have greatly benefited from his analyses of texts, and then this here is the fruit of I believe one of his other former students, Michael Floyd here. But anyhow, I wanted to show you this, but let's look at Habakkuk 2:1-5 real quick, and I'll just translate this stuff real quick. I shall stand upon my watch. I shall take a stand upon the fortified fortress. I shall watch to see what he will speak with me, and what I shall return concerning my reproof. And Yahweh answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain upon tablets, in order that the one who reads it might run. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. It breathes to the end. It does not lie. If it tarry, wait for it. For it shall surely come. This is the infinitive absolute in Hebrew. And not delay. Behold, his soul is swollen. It is not upright within him. But the righteous man shall live by his faithfulness. For surely wine is treacherous, and the proud man likewise does not abide at home. His soul, whose soul is enlarged as Sheol, and he is as death and not satisfied. And he gathers to him all nations, and he gathers to him all peoples. Okay, so that's the whole context, and when you read it in Hebrew, and basically it's talking about a vision that he saw, and that Yahweh's instructions to him were to make it plain. The one who reads it can run the race, and that it's appointed for the end times, and and if it delays, just wait for it, for it'll certainly come. And then when you come here to verse 4, okay, then the text stops and starts talking, as Floyd down here says, it's a revelation contrasting the fate of the greedy and with the fate of the just. Okay, and it's talking here about how people are going to respond to this particular revelation, and for those who are the wicked, it says that, behold, his soul is swollen, it is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faithfulness. That's really the way we should read this in Hebrew. Shall live by his faithfulness. And then it talks about surely, wine is treacherous, and the proud man, he does not abide at home. His soul, whose soul is enlarged as Sheol, he is as death, not satisfied, and he gathers to him all peoples, and gathers to him all nations, or all nations and all peoples here. Okay, so that's the text here, and then we'll see what happens with the Septuagint and how it goes. And this is just a reference to the work of Michael Floyd here from the previous slide that I showed his structural analysis. I just didn't have enough room to put all of the information on it, so there it is. Okay. All right. So what we have here is we have down here the Hebrew text that we had just read, and then here is the Septuagint text. Okay, and then we can pick up the text right here, write the vision, write it plainly. I'm supposed to palindromatically take gropson here and bring it back here. Write it clearly upon a tablet. Okay. And that there's a change because it said tablets in the Hebrew text down here, right here, right? That's plural. In order that the one who reads it may pursue them, the things in them. Okay, and that's also different because we have bow here, right? In it. Okay, so there's some other things going on here. Because the vision is yet for a time, it shall arise at the end, and not in vain. And if now you got to remember something here. Horasis here is feminine, okay, and when we get here, it's beginning to go masculine. Okay, so then the Septuagint text is changing it's changing from feminine to masculine. So then they are therefore now beginning to look at and read this text messianically, and if he delays, endure for him. That means endure for a while. It means wait for him. Okay, and so this hupamenon here, this also is really applicable to our text in Hebrews. Now our author didn't pick up on this, but it does. Our author uses hupameno in our text. You have need of patience, right? And anyhow, they were told to endure. So patience and endurance is all based off of this particular verb, hupameno. And so if he delays, wait for him, because when he comes, he shall come and not delay. If he draws back, my soul shall not take pleasure in him, but the righteous shall live by my faith. And the one who is drunk and we should say, he's a mocker, okay? A boastful man shall not bring to completion, who his soul is enlarged as Sheol, and this one is as death. He is not fulfilled, and he gathers to him all nations, and he gathers to himself all peoples. So there is a difference here in the Septuagint from the MT, in that the MT it's talking about the vision. You're to wait for the vision, and because the vision will come and it won't delay. And so when we come to the Septuagint, then it basically then looks at this messianically, because when he comes, he shall come and not delay. And so then this scholars have seen that this is interpreted messianically, and then basically Hebrews just puts the definite article here on erchomenos here, and just basically, like Bruce said, he dots the I's and crosses the T on the messianic interpretation, and then Midrashically interprets it christologically. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. And we'll look here at Bruce. All of this here we have already looked at. We'll just pick it up here. In the Septuagint version, as quoted by our author, some of these words are given a different emphasis. Because the vision is yet for an appointed time, it will appear at length and not in vain. If he is late, wait for him, because he will surely come. He will not delay. If he draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him, but my righteous one shall live by faith. Here it is not simply for the fulfillment of the vision that the prophet is told to wait, but for a person, presumably an expected deliverer. When this deliverer appears, he will vindicate the righteousness of God and put down the oppressor. If, however, he draws back, that will indicate that he's not God's chosen agent. But if he does not draw back, but shows himself to be indeed God's chosen agent, his righteous one, then by his faithfulness he will win his life. The deliverer in question is not called the Lord's anointed in so many words, but the Septuagint interpretation of the passage is essentially messianic. Our author then is but dotting the I's and crossing the T's of the Septuagint interpretation when he applies the prophecy to the second coming of Christ. In his quotation of Habakkuk 2:4, our author inverts the two parts of the verse, my righteous one shall live by faith, is applied to the Christian believer, as I was telling you before. Tempted to wonder if Christ will ever return in accordance with his promise. And the warning about the divine displeasure which will rest upon anyone who draws back is applied to him who yields to the temptation to relapse from his Christian profession into his earlier way of life. The reason for the inversion is not hard to determine. By this means, my righteous one becomes the subject of both parts of the verse. If he perseveres in faith, he will gain his life. If he shrink back, he will prove himself reprobate. Okay, so you can see there then the application. And then Luke Timothy Johnson here, we'll just look down here in Hebrews, then the verses stand not for two classes of people on whom judgment will fall, but for two ways of responding to God's visitation, the way of the apostate and the way of the faithful. That is very key. So I wanted you to note Luke Timothy Johnson here in New Testament Library Series. He does a very good job. I paid some attention to him throughout the course of my work here in Hebrews, and I would suggest that you would read up on him too. So he's going to say some of the things that Bruce did, and we'll continue on here. Okay, and then coming here to this particular slide, we're looking here at verse 39. This is the summary, the author's summary statement. And he says, but we are not of those who shrink away to destruction, but we are those of faith to the preservation of the soul. So when we look here at hupastales and we look here at pistuos, what we're looking at here are these are called predicate genitives, okay? And a predicate genitive basically is functioning as a possessive genitive, or a genitive of relationship, and because it takes the place of the predicate here, and uses the genitive here, and so it's basically, in a long about way, it's functioning as a predicate nominative, even though it's in the genitive case. So that's why it's structured here like this as a predicate nominative would be. But it's talking about here, we are not of those who shrink away. So this is now, when I told you here, how this scripture is really, it's coming down here to come back to the warning here that was issued in verses 26 to 31. And remember, that was a warning, right? Okay, so our author here say, we are not of those who shrink away to destruction, i.e. the warning passages, right? The one who turns his back on Christ, renounces that Jesus is the Messiah, basically spits on his blood, and insults the Spirit of grace. Well, there's no hope for someone like that, and he can't enter heaven. Rejecting the lordship of Christ as the Son of God, and refusing his sacrificial blood is efficacious as pig's blood. So, so this obviously, all interpreters except for who doesn't interpret it this way. I don't know what's his problem. It's all just to salvage his once saved, always saved garbage. But now the author says, but we are of those of faith to the possession of the soul, or to the preservation of the soul. So then our author is basically letting, he's encouraging his readers that, hey, look, we're of this camp. We're not apostates. We're going to continue in our faith, and that's how this is to be understood. Absolutely, 100%, as we'll see here. And so this is why I put down here, this is point gamma, the author's final summary statement, negatively stated, shrinking back to destruction, resulting in destruction. Positively stated, having faith to the preservation of the soul. Okay, so then that's the basically the two ways here of living, basically just like Psalm 1. And that's this is how our author ends this great central section here, with his final summary statement, and you can see here that coaster here, just to get you to understand how scholars basically view this. If he shrinks back, this is going back to verse 38, to shrink back brings divine displeasure and destruction, as the wilderness generation failed to enter God's rest because of unbelief related to ideas of falling away from God and his grace. My soul will not be favorable to him. The Old Testament sometimes refer to God's soul when he's dealing with divine emotion, whether wrath or favor. This text refers to divine judgment, shrinking back to destruction. Destruction is the eternal judgment about which the listeners had been instructed. The destruction of the sinner is forever. He will not be remembered when God looks after the righteous. Boom, 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 boom. But by faith for the preservation of the soul. Preserving one's soul often meant saving one's life from death, but it ultimately means life beyond death. The soul is a seat of courage. It is similar to spirit, so that Hebrews speaks interchangeably of preserving one's soul and having one's spirit made complete in the heavenly Jerusalem. And so I just wanted you to see what Coaster had to say here. He's a very fine scholar. And then you can read David Allen. I just really don't want to get into it. He basically just saying that this is verse 39 is not talking about anybody going to hell, and it's just talking about divine judgment upon the Christian who doesn't really want to abide well, because remember, he's in this once saved, always saved mode. And so this guy that shrinks back to destruction, it's not talking about eternal hell. It's talking about he just undergoes some destructive moments, corrective destructive moments in his life from the Lord, but he's going to heaven. Don't worry about it. This doesn't mean anything. So he's doing all this to once again, like I said, to preserve his once saved, always saved theology. And this is, the guy wrote a really good commentary, folks. Get the commentary. It's really good. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, it helps you understand that he's just so off base from what the text says and from what everybody else, all the other interpreters are saying. It's just, oh my gosh, it's just a stretch. But anyhow, I don't need to dwell on that. So, folks, please like, share, subscribe. Any questions, you go ahead and email me. God bless you. And we come back. We're going to actually come into the end of the book here, beginning in chapter 11 all the way to 13. And we're going to be looking at the great chapter of faith. And it is going to be exciting. God bless you.